Okay, welcome everyone. Hope you all can hear me. Thank you all for joining us today for today's training, Getting Started webinar for nonprofits, submitting charities filings in Passport. Today, our target audience for this topic is nonprofit organizations. We'll be zooming in on charities filings as a subtopic of the HHS Prequalification and Passport. If you would like to know the complete process overall, please refer to the webinar recording on our website. We also have guests with us today from the Charities Bureau to go over compliance. So my name is Misato Takamori, and I represent the Learning and Development team here at MOCS, the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, and I'm one of today's presenters. I'm joined by my colleague Jenny Wei from the MOCS legal team, presenting on behalf of the MOCS vendor management team. And we have our special guest from the New York State Charities Bureau, which is a part of the state's Office of the Attorney General. We are very pleased to welcome Hannah Rubin. She is the Bureau's Director of Registration. And we're joined also by David Alvarez, the Bureau's systems operator. He manages the Bureau's online registration and annual filing applications to ensure that their accessibility and consistent performance. He also partners with the Bureau's customer service staff to guide and support online users. So we'll be covering a lot of material today, but rest assured we are recording today's session and we will publish it to our website as a helpful resource. We'll begin with a quick overview of MOCS and its purpose, then we'll move right into our core topic, charities filings. We will clarify what documents to include with the HHS PQL application and passport, as well as how to identify the correct filing period and calculate the deadline in future annual filing deadlines. We'll cover common mistakes to avoid and facilitate a speedy PQL review. Again, it's a pleasure to have Hannah Rubin and David Alvarez with us today from the Charities Bureau. They'll speak to how to complete charities registration and meeting annual filing compliance with the state, plus a teaser of their registration process online. Finally, we'll share our resources and points of access and close out with a question and answer segment. The Mayor's Office of Contract Services, also known as MOCS, leads procurement for the City of New York. We serve as an oversight and service agency dedicated to making it easier for vendors and nonprofits like you to do business with the city. So let's dive right into our main topic, submitting charities filings through the HHS Prequalification application and passport. Due to the nature of today's training topic, this webinar is specific to nonprofits and charity organizations. I'm going to guess that many of you know about the HHS Prequalification in Passport, but for anyone new or needs a refresher, I'll give a quick overview. What is HHS Prequalification or PQL? The HHS PQL enables human service providers to demonstrate basic business readiness to the city and enables the city to collect and vet providers' business information via an application in the form of a pre-qualified list in Passport. HHS pre-qualified vendors are eligible to respond to Health and Human Service RFPs and Passport. Additionally, HHS pre-qualification is a part of the procedural requirements to clear a City Council discretionary award for contracting. The HHS pre-qualification application is comprised of the questionnaire and required documents, which are completed in Passport and submitted to MOCS for review. Today, we will not cover the end-to-end process on how to complete and submit the HHS prequalification application, as we do have a webinar recording dedicated to it with a system demonstration posted on our website. I highly recommend watching that video. Today, we are narrowing our scope to focus on submitting the charities filings and which documents are required to apply for the HHS prequalification and maintain it on an annual basis. And I'll state the obvious here, these charities filings documents must be submitted as a single electronic file. Often it can be one file comprised of multiple documents. First, I'd like to flag that as nonprofits, there are additional documents you may be required to upload to the questionnaire in your HHS PQL application. And they would be certificate of incorporation or equivalent, corporate bylaws, board of directors list, IRS letter of determination, also known as 501c3, your organization's conflict of interest policy, and your organization's whistleblower policy. The nonprofits who annually file with New York State Charities Bureau will be required to include their most recent annual filings in their HHS PQL application. Once pre-qualified, your organization will be required to submit an application update to maintain pre-qualification status based on your annual filing schedule. The deadline to file will determine the expiration date for one's HHS PQL application. Vendors who are newly registered with the Charities Bureau will be submitting their Char 410, which is the form to initially register as a charity with the state. Once registered, depending on their status, they'll be submitting an annual filing to the state, which the city will also collect and review as part of the process to maintain HHS prequalification. The type of filings or combination of documents a registered charity will be required to include depends on an organization's revenue as reported through the IRS 990. Here are the potential filings combinations organizations will be submitting as one PDF to initially pre-qualify and subsequently submit annually through an application update to maintain pre-qualification status. Before I continue, here's a disclaimer. The screenshots displayed in this presentation reflect the current state of Passport at the time of this presentation. Keep in mind that in the future, Passport may look different. To access the HHS prequalification in Passport, we must find the HHS prequalified list in the RFX module, and this lives in the top navigation menu of Passport. You go to the RFX module, then choose Browse Prequalified Lists. You'll see that the Browse Prequalified List screen, and at the top you'll find a few options to filter your search. Type the letters HHS into the keywords field, and then you can go ahead and click the search button. You'll see the search results in the table located below the search criteria. The information displayed will show important information regarding each prequalified list managed in Passport. Click the PQL label called HHS Accelerator Prequalification. Alternatively, you may click the PQL ID located directly to the left. Once you get to the PQL application, you will land on the Overview tab, which is represented by a monitor icon. Since the left navigation on this screenshot is closed, if you're starting your first PQL application, you will see the Create New Application button. And of course, if your organization has already been pre-qualified, you will see the Update Application button. To access the application, whether new or renewal, click one of these two buttons. After clicking either of those two buttons, you will see the series of buttons available to you at the top have then changed. And you can begin completing the questionnaire and documents tabs. Those are located on the left for navigation. First, click the questionnaire tab. You'll be required to complete the business information section, and the progress meter there should display 100% when complete. To begin, click the drop-down for corporate structure to identify your organization as a nonprofit. The questionnaire will update and display questions based on your selection. How you respond to the corporate structure question will determine the questions in this questionnaire tab and the type of documents you will be asked to submit here and in the Documents tab. In the last question of the questionnaire tab, you will be prompted to certify that your organization has uploaded or will upload your most recent completed charities filing or exemption document in the Documents tab. To certify, you will identify your organization's revenue range, which determines the type of filing you will upload. New charities organizations shall be submitting their Char 410 form used to register with the Charities Bureau. First, the Char 410 is the first option here in the list. And next, for those of you whose revenue is less than or equal to $25,000, shall upload the Char 500. If your revenue is over $25,000 up to $250,000, upload the Char 500 and IRS 990 only. The Charities Bureau does not require a separate financial statement as it's already included in the IRS 990. So we're also following that for this particular range. If your revenue is in the next bracket from $250,000 up to $1 million, submit the Char 500, IRS 990, and CPA review report. If your revenue is over $1 million, then submit the Char 500, 990, and CPA audit report. If you are exempt from filing, upload an exemption letter plus either a 12-month financial statement or profit and loss statement. Let's look at a scenario together. This is Anjali. She helps run an arts foundation and relies heavily on city funding She's in charge of submitting her annual charities filings with New York State, and it's her responsibility to maintain HHS prequalification and passport. Her previous filing year's IRS 990 showed a revenue of $215,000. These are the revenue ranges. Again, in the next slide, we'll have a knowledge check. So which forms should Anjali attach to her HHS PQL application? Should she submit the Char 410, Char 500, Char 500 and IRS 990 combined Char 500, IRS 990 and CPA review report, a combined Char 500, IRS 990, CPA audit, or an exemption letter and 12-month financial statement or the profit and loss statement? So if you said Anjali needs to submit the Char 500 and 990, you're absolutely right. Okay, so now let's go over how to upload your organization's most recent filings to your PQL application and passport. If you're not the person in your organization that handles filing with the New York State Charities Bureau, you will want to understand how to determine your organization's filing deadline and any future deadlines. These deadlines will help you to fill out the validity period expiration date in passport when you attach your filing to the PQL application. We recommend adding these key dates to your corporate compliance calendars. So what is your organization's filing period? It's important to know is the end of your filing period plus your charity registration category. These will determine your filing deadline with the state and your deadline to upload your annual prequalification application and passport if you're already prequalified. So here are some examples of common filing periods, but these do not represent all. July 1st to June 30th, September 1st to August 31st, January 1st to December 31st. If you want to know your deadline to file annual charities filings with the state, you need to know your filing type. And organizations file as either 7A, they can be dual, or EPTL. So let's figure out together what nonprofit organization X's filing deadline will be for the filing year 2021. Filing year 2021 starts July 1st, 2021 and ends June 30th, 2022. We know that nonprofit X is a dual registration type. And remember, the deadline to file annual charities filings with New York State and the Charities Bureau is the same date that the HHS PQL applications and passport will expire if you're filing. Let's look at this table to help us figure out this deadline. We have two columns with deadlines, one for 7A dual and another for EPTL registered organizations. The next year is determined by the end of the current filing year. On the left, we have filing period schedule, and here you'll find your organization's filing period. Nonprofit X is July to June. The deadline for any dual registrant filer with a filing period ending June 30th would be May 15th of the following year. What is Nonprofit X's filing deadline for filing year 2021? It's May 15th, 2023. This provider became HHS Prequalified last year, which means their PQL status is also expiring the same date if they don't update their PQL application with their 2022 annual filing by this time. Since updating PQL applications include MOCS review, providers should bake in extra time in case the application is returned to them for revisions. So let's say this provider was an EPTL registered organization. What would be the date their HHS PQL application will expire and the deadline to submit their annual filings? Okay, so if you were thinking June 30th, 2023, then you've got that right. And we'll cover this a little bit later, but I wanted to point out that the validity expiration date in passport of the submitted filing for the filing period ending June 30th, 2022 would be May 15th, 2024. So let's take a look at Anjali's organization, Jazz Singers for Change. Remember, it's her responsibility to complete and maintain HHS PQL and passport. so that her organization remains eligible to respond to HHS opportunities released through Passport. Her organization also annually applies for and receives City Council discretionary funding. She wants to make sure that her organization is all set up and completes procedural requirements to clear that discretionary award as soon as possible. So essentially, she will do all she can as early as possible to clear the way to contract registration. So Anjali helped her organization become HHS Prequalified last year in Passport. Her organization is registered as a dual filer. The charities filing attached to her approved HHS PQL application is for the filing period ending June 30th, 2021. Remember the table? Filing periods ending June 30th for 7A duals will have an ultimate deadline of May 15th of the next year. The next year is determined by the end date of the filing period. So for example, for the filing period ending June 30th, 2021, that would be May 15th, 2022. Jazz Singers for Change's next filing deadline for the filing period ending June 30th, 2022 would have been May 15th, 2023. So this also serves as the expiration in Passport for her submitted filing. All this information will help you to file on time and help you to understand what MOCS requires providers to include in their HHS PQL applications. So let's go back to the HHS PQL screens in Passport. Here we are on the Documents tab. This is where nonprofits will upload their annual charities filing. In this example, we have a nonprofit that answered in the questionnaire that they certified their organization has a revenue range of $25,000 up to $250,000. Therefore, they're uploading their Char 500, IRS 990 to their HHS PQL. To do that, you click the pencil icon by Required Documents. Next, you'll see the window where you will attach your filing. There are quite a few fields here, so let's walk through completing this together. You can disregard the version field. It will auto-populate with a system-generated number. And let's pretend that this was Anjali's application. The document name will be what you call this file in Passport. She may have written something like Jazz Singers, June 30th, 2021, filing Char 500, IRS 990. The validity fields show a begin date and an expiration date. The begin date is the date of application submission, and the expiration date she entered for her annual filing would have been May 15th, 2023, which is not the deadline of the filing period ending June 30th, 2021 that she just uploaded, but the deadline for the next year's filing. This will inform Passport to notify your organization's Passport contacts when your PQL application will expire, and that she should be submitting her next year's annual filing. MOCS and Passport follows the same deadline schedule laid out by the New York State Charities Bureau. If you enter this information incorrectly, the MOCS review team will return your application back to you to correct. And the last step is to upload the correct file with all relevant documents. In this case, Anjali uploaded a file that included the Char 500 and IRS 990 for the 2020 filing year. Here's what the screen looked like when Anjali submitted her updated filings. Remember, the validity expiration date represents these key milestones. The date the next year's filing is due, the date your organization's submitted filing expires, and it's also the date prequalification will expire if not renewed. Here's a quick zoom in at what the columns in the Documents tab will look like after filings documentation is correctly submitted to a PQL application. You will notice the previously empty fields are now display a value, and most importantly, you can confirm the validity field shows a green dot, meaning the file submitted is valid. This will turn red when the validity period ends. At this point, you'll click the Save and Close button and submit the PQL application to MOCS for review after you're double checking the questionnaire tab to ensure that all of the content is up to date and accurate. Remember to maintain prequalification and an approved HHS PQL status in Passport. A valid status document is required. Expired validity for your filings documentation will mean that your PQL application is expired and you'll be required to renew your PQL by submitting your next annual filing. Here's what an approved PQL status will look like. Nonprofits can check their HHS PQL status from the PQL list browse screen in the RFX module of Passport. The column current status will show approved if you are pre-qualified and your documents are within the validity period. You can also click the PQL label to view this status and more details. So final reminders for providers who are updating their pre-qualification applications in Passport with their new filings. Always review and update the questionnaire tab to reflect any changes to your organization. Common changes for most providers are to the board list, but keep in mind if there are changes to policy documents or your certificate of incorporation, do submit updated versions in your application's questionnaire tab. Of course, you will be submitting your new annual filings. Then the PQL application must be certified, signed, and submitted to MOCS for review. For full instructions, please refer to the HHS PQL guide and the recorded webinar on this topic. We'll post those details in the chat. Both are available on our Learn Passport page of the MOCS website on nyc.gov/passport. Next, my colleague Jenny will speak to some common vendor mistakes when submitting PQL applications and application updates.
So this is your organization's authority to operate as a corporate entity. Organizations apply for this authority and the state will grant it. So this is a certificate that is issued by the state in which your organization is incorporated. For most of your organizations, this will be a legal document issued by New York State Department of State Corporations. But some organizations may be incorporated in another state. So whatever state your organization incorporated in would be the issuer of this document. The state seal usually indicates the authority to issue. If your organization did incorporate in Delaware or some other state, the corporate entity still needs to register to conduct business in New York State, and we would need a copy of the confirmation that your organization did that. If your organization changed its name, you need to register that legal name change with the Department of State, and they will amend your certificate of incorporation. Again, the document confirming they have your new name recorded comes from the state. That's the one that we want you to upload. Next, the Board of Directors list. So this is a list that should be current, and it must include each board member's current place of employment if that's applicable. If the person is not employed, you can indicate that they are an entrepreneur or self-employed or a homemaker, whatever is appropriate. There may be a rare case where the chair of the board is also employed by the organization. This is not recommended at all. It's not a good practice for independent governance, and actually not allowed by the New York State nonprofit corporation law unless 2/3 of the total board approve this with the documented justification. So here's what the New York State Nonprofit Corporation Law says in Section 713F. No employee of the corporation shall serve as the chair of the board or hold any other title with similar responsibilities unless the board approves such employee serving as chair of the board by a 2/3 vote of the entire board and contemporaneously documents in writing the basis for the board approval. Provided, however, that no such employee shall be considered an independent director for the purposes of this chapter. So if your organization has this rare case and the board has approved and justified the fact that an employee can serve as the board chair, we do require a letter to be uploaded that explains the unique justification and certifies the legal criteria were met, including that 2/3 of the entire board approved and the chair is not considered independent and therefore is not allowed to vote on their salary and does not select the independent auditor or hear the auditor's recommendation as a member of the audit committee if that's applicable. Okay, third, conflict of interest policy. So this is a common mistake. We sometimes get the city's conflict of interest policy uploaded in this category, and that's not what we're looking for here. This requirement comes also from the New York State Nonprofit Corporation Law, Section 715A, which says the board shall adopt and oversee the implementation of and compliance with a conflict of interest policy to ensure that its directors, officers, and key persons act in the corporation's best interest and comply with applicable legal requirements. So a conflict of interest policy is something that your board will adopt, and legally it needs to include at least 7 elements. It can be more restrictive than the law requires, but no less than what the law requires, which is it has to define the circumstances that constitute a conflict of interest. It has to define the procedures for a potential conflict of interest to be disclosed to the board and for the board to determine if it is in fact a conflict of interest according to the policy. The policy must require the person with the conflict recuse themselves from any meeting at which the conflict is discussed. The policy must prohibit the person with the conflict from trying to influence the board's decision. The policy must require the board document the conflict and the discussion of the conflict in their minutes contemporaneously or at the same time that it was disclosed and discussed. So these procedures have to comply with Section 715 on related party transactions, which in brief require disclosure and recusal as mentioned above, and board consideration of whether the conflicted transaction is fair, reasonable, and in the organization's best interest. And again, the majority of the board must formally approve this transaction, and that must be documented. So finally, the conflict of interest policy that you upload here must require that disclosure statements from each candidate before they are elected to the board, and all board members need to provide these disclosure statements on an annual basis. And finally, a reminder about all the charities filings details that Masato covered earlier in the presentation. Please make sure you select the right revenue category when you upload your charities filing, because that determines the required documentation on the Documents tab. We check the revenue listed in your IRS 990, and if it doesn't match the category you selected, we have to send it back to you to make that correction, so please make sure it matches. If your organization is exempt as a religious organization or a PTA, for example, you can use the drop-down to select Exempt from Charities. This has to match what your registration status is with the Charities Bureau Registry online, so please make sure you only select it if you have registered your exempt status with the Charities Bureau or have not registered with the Charities Bureau at all since your organization is completely exempt from the registration filing requirements. We'll hear a lot more about those requirements from the Charities Bureau Registration Chief in a moment. So we focus most of our time today on the Passport Prequalification Documents tab, where you upload annual Charities Bureau filings updates. The most common mistakes, again, just to go over this one more time. So the most common mistake applicants make is entering an incorrect filing period. So I hope Masato's presentation cleared up any confusion about how to identify your annual Charities Bureau filing due dates and how to calculate the validity expiration date corresponding to your next filing's due date. A more unusual case that tends to cause problems is if your organization changes its fiscal year, let's say from a calendar year to a fiscal year ending June 30th. That first filing year after your organization's fiscal year change will be either shorter or longer than 12 months, but the filings must cover all periods. We're going to hear from the Charities Bureau on best practices for that situation, but just make sure there's no gap in reporting and all the dates are correctly entered for the new filing year. We also see a lot of mistakes related to basic information. So people may forget where the pre-qualification application is in Passport and instead upload their documents to the Documents tab on their vendor profile. It's okay to do that, but your pre-qualification status will expire if you don't also upload the annual charities filings to the pre-qualification documents tab. Again, that's in the RFX module. Why does it have to be in the pre-qualification documents tab? Prequalification is designed to include the validity period, which sets the clock ticking for your next annual submission. And it includes your certification that you're in compliance with New York State requirements. Again, prequalification status allows organizations discretionary awards to be cleared and allows organizations to submit proposals for new contracts. So you want to upload your annual filings to the prequalification document tab before your status expires. As I mentioned in the last slide, we review your revenue on the IRS 990 and we make sure that you're uploading the correct required documentation. If your organization received more than $1 million in revenue during the fiscal year, but didn't upload independently audited financial statements, commonly referred to as an audit, your filings are not compliant and prequalification will be returned. You must upload the legally required documentation based on the organization's revenue. Char 500 filings are required to have 2 signatures, and we do check for that. So please make sure they've been signed in compliance with the Charities Bureau's requirements. The registration category you report in your prequalification should match what is in the online charities registry search. So whether that's 7A or EPTL, we do check. So please make sure you put the right category in the application. If you are certifying that your organization is exempt from the Charities Bureau filing requirements, it must be because your organization is described in both the exemption sections of the New York State Estates, Powers and Trust Law, that's EPTL, and Article 7A of the New York State Executive Law. They're slightly different exemption categories, and so you have to be in both if you are actually exempt. So finally, to wrap this up, please upload proof that your Charities Bureau filing requirements were met every year before the due date to maintain pre-qualification status. Please ensure your passport contacts are up to date so that the reminders about this upcoming validity period exemption expiration will be sent to the right person who can act on that. And always submit your charities filings documentation in the HHS pre-qualification application in Passport. Now we'd like to welcome Hannah Rubin, Director of Registration from the New York State Charities Bureau. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Jenny and Masato. My colleague David Alvarez and I really appreciate the opportunity to share this important compliance information with you. New York State has two statutes, as you've heard, that establish the regulatory framework for charities operating here. The Estates, Powers and Trust Law and Executive Law 7A. Charities that seek donations or other funding here, including grants, must register under Executive Law 7A before they begin fundraising. Charities that have charitable assets here, such as a building, or that conduct charitable programs here, or that are incorporated here as charitable not-for-profit corporations, must register under the Estates, Powers and Trust Law. Many charities will register under both statutes, and we refer to these as dual registrants. Charities operating in New York generally must file annual reports with the Charities Bureau once they register. These are posted in a public registry on the Office of the Attorney General website. Funders, including government agencies, use these reports, as do potential donors, the press, and the Charities Bureau's attorneys. Registering and filing annual reports is a part of oversight by the Charities Bureau, and it's required by New York State law. The Charities Bureau registers about 3,500 new charities annually. Those are charities that are either just starting or entering New York. And it receives financial reports each year from roughly 52,000 charities that are operating here. Next. The Charities Bureau works closely with MOCS and with Grants Gateway to ensure that charities seeking funds are duly registered and current and complete in their annual filings. The Bureau has a dedicated customer service team who are available during regular business hours to assist charities with registering, with filing, and with curing delinquencies. Both registration and annual filing are now done through online interactive web applications. So who needs to register? Any charity that is conducting a program here, that has a charitable asset here, mentioned a building, and ones that are seeking funding here, whether those funds come from individual donors, from government agencies, or from foundations. What does charitable include? Next slide. Charitable is defined broadly. It includes organizations that have 501c3 tax exemption, It also includes charitable New York State nonprofit corporations, and it includes organizations that have charitable purposes. These need not be nonprofits, and all of an organization's purposes need not be charitable. There are some exemptions to registration. Many religious organizations are not required to register under New York State law. However, we encourage charities to register even if they believe they're eligible for an exemption. There's an exemption section in the online application, and charities' eligibility for exemption will be determined by how they answer questions and the documents that they upload. Next. The registration process has been streamlined online, so charities can submit their applications quickly and easily. A charity will need to know whether it has IRS tax exemption. It will need to list its officers, to disclose its activities in New York, whether it's running a program or raising money or both. It will also need to upload its certificate of incorporation or other forming document, and its bylaws or other rules document like a constitution. The annual filing process has moved online. It's designed to give charities an opportunity to update the Bureau on key information, like what they currently do in New York. Say a charity has begun raising money here or has launched a program here. Charities will need to list their government grants. If they use professional fundraisers, they need to disclose those contracts. They also will need to upload a PDF of their IRS 990 form and a financial review or audit if the income threshold is met. The audit threshold recently rose to $1 million in revenue. Charities registration and financial reports must be attested by an organization's chief executive and the person in the organization who has fiscal responsibility for that organization. Titles may vary, but the roles are what is statutorily required. A third-party preparer, say an outside accountant or attorney, cannot sign on their client's behalf. Both the online registration application and the annual filing application use DocuSign, and that allows preparers to email the forms to their clients for attestation. We designed online annual filing to help charities complete the form easily. There are pop-up definitions, email prompts when a filing has reached the next stage, such as payment, and reminders if a filing has yet to be completed. We've created a short video tour of the process, which we'll show you now. This presentation will then go over certain web pages after the tour so that you become familiar with the format and questions.
Welcome to the Charities Bureau online annual filing application. On this first screen, charities can update their address, flag if the organization has had a name change, or change its fiscal year. Charities are also asked to confirm their tax-exempt status, which IRS document they file, and whether they are a public entity or a private foundation. If a third-party preparer is filling out the form, that person will need to fill in contact information on this screen. This page lets charities update the Charities Bureau on their current New York activities. For instance, if an organization has started soliciting contributions in New York, here's where it would provide that information. If a charity's answers change their registration status, for example, if a charity has been based in New York and now has started to solicit contributions here as well, the screen will display the organization's new dual filing status. On this screen, the organization is asked if it solicits contribution in New York State. If it does, the organization will choose from a series of dollar ranges that best reflect what was raised in that year. If an organization is a private foundation that receives contributions in New York, it also will select from the dollar ranges. If a charity does not meet the reporting threshold in a given year under one or both registration statutes, it can claim an annual exemption here. This screen gathers a few numbers from the organization's IRS 990 to calculate the filing fee and other requirements. Depending on what is entered, for example, the organization may need to include a financial review or an audit with its filing. The help text that comes up in the form is key to the type of 990 the organization files, which was selected on the contact information screen. The organization can also flag on this page if it plans to withdraw from New York. On this page, the organization will list any professional fundraisers that contract with the organization. If the organization uses more than one, it can click the plus sign to add space for that information. On this page, the organization can also list any government grants that it has been given. The organization will upload all their required documents as PDF through this page. On this screen, the organization is also asked to remove any Schedule B material or other private material from their 990 prior to uploading the documents. Filers should make sure the materials have been extracted before submitting it. If the organization is required to submit a financial review or audit, the organization will need to upload the document before proceeding. This screen lets preparers review all their answers before going to the e-signature page. If an answer needs to be changed, the preparer can click a box to go back and edit it. Preparers enter the names, titles, and emails of the required signatories on this screen. Unless an organization is a trust, 2 signatories are required. One an authorized officer and the other a person with fiscal responsibility for the organization. Third-party preparers are not permitted to sign on behalf of statutorily required signatories.
So we're just going to look at a few pages that have some questions. This is the contact page, and this is where charities can update their address, their fiscal year end, any change in tax exempt status. And if an organization has had a name change, it should note that on this page. On the document upload screen, that organization will then need to upload an amended certificate of incorporation that supports the name change. When organizations used to file with us on paper, they would try to update us on what their current New York activities were. This screen permits an organization to flag if it has started soliciting contributions or started using a professional fundraiser or has opened an office here. On this screen, the filers will fill in key numbers from their IRS 990 so that the form can correctly calculate the fee. At the start of the application, charities will indicate what type of 990 they are currently using, and the help text that then appears on this screen will be keyed to that type of 990. Filers can also flag on this screen if they are planning to dissolve or to withdraw from New York. So here is the e-signature screen yet again. And filers need to enter the names, titles, and emails of the 2 required signatories. These signatories must attest to the filing's veracity. Third-party preparers cannot sign on behalf of the signatories. New York requires that a president or other authorized officer and a person with fiscal responsibility for the organization sign the filing. Many different titles may be appropriate. For example, the filing could be signed by a CEO and a CFO. We've created an interactive checklist that you will see right before entering the annual filing portal. And we do recommend that filers use it before they start their filing. It's on the web page at the start of the form, and it will give them a breakdown of exactly what they need to complete the filing successfully. We also have live support by phone and by email during regular business hours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. All right. Now, we're coming to the end, towards the end of our webinar, but before we go over resources, we wanted to quickly throw this slide up. It shows a couple of QR codes as well as links that we'll be providing in the web chat. We really would love to hear your feedback on this training. So please do fill out our survey. And the second link is for today's webinar handout. So we'll have a lot of key slides provided for you that you can go back to and reference. And once the recording is made available, you'll be able to kind of look at that along with rewatching this webinar. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through these slides. We have a bunch of different resources for vendors. The MOCS website, nyc.gov/MOCS, also nyc.gov/passport for all of our passport resources. We have an Eventbrite page. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out to all passport vendor contacts. And here is our nyc.gov/passport page for all things passport, including logins, how to register a NYS ID if you don't have access yet. And we have a dedicated resource for nonprofits. This is the nyc.gov/nonprofits page, where you can find a lot of resources relating to City Council discretionary funding, indirect cost rate. And again, nyc.gov/passport, we have all of our learning resources there. When you click on the Learn Passport tab, we have links to registration for our trainings, as well as all of the recorded webinars and all of our material resources for Passport. We also have this Getting Started on Your Path to Contracting with New York City. It's a great resource for you to visit. You can get to it from nyc.gov/passport and click the Opportunities tab. We have the discretionary award tracker for those of you who've been designated an award for City Council discretionary funding. You can look up by EIN or your organization's name to find out the status of your award. You can easily access this by going to nyc.gov/award tracker. And for any materials and support, contacting our wonderful MOCS service desk, you just need to go to nyc.gov/MOCS-help. We have links to all of our relevant resources, including amazing frequently asked questions.